Hello, everyone. Welcome back to the Infinite Harmony podcast. I'm co-founder Jackie Dragon, and today we'll be covering the second and third harmonic principle of the Church of Infinite Harmony, the Principle of Coherence and the Principle of Co-Emergence. These two principles are deeply intertwined and lay a foundation for just how connected human beings are to every plant, animal, and element on Earth and beyond. I hope you enjoyed today's podcast. What is it that binds us together in this world? When I think of all the atrocities that we've experienced as humans, mostly at the hands of other humans, it seems like a minor miracle that we're even still here. Somehow, humans have managed to keep humanity going, despite the differences in cultures and religions and politics. If you were to metaphorically separate human behaviors into two bowls, one filled with the acts of war, deception, and domination, the other brimming with instances of cooperation and collective spirit, I suspect rather optimistically that the latter would tip the scales, because here we are. Not just surviving, but in many respects, flourishing. This is not exclusively a testament to human resilience. It's a nod to the resilience of life itself, which, despite adversity, inexorably perseveres. It's tempting to look at this endurance cynically, to deem it a mere outcome of Darwinian principles at play. Survival of the fittest, red in tooth and claw, but that would be an incomplete interpretation. Survival may be a biological imperative, but our existence is mediated by far more than just biological processes. We are guided by stories, ethics, and shared visions that galvanize us to aspire to something even greater than mere survival. To communities, to civilizations, to moral and aesthetic ideals that elevate our existence from the rudimentary mechanics of living. One might say that what binds us is a shared narrative, albeit one that is continually being written, erased, and rewritten. It's a narrative shaped by the interplay between our individual and collective dreams, fears, triumphs, and tragedies. This narrative has its dark chapters, but it also has its moments of transcendent beauty, of love, of unspeakable acts of kindness and cooperation. And it's the latter that imbue us with hope, fueling the ongoing collective human endeavor. While it's true that life, whether human or otherwise, has an innate drive to continue, what makes the human chapter of this broader story unique is our ability to choose the kind of narrative we want to craft. In the end, we're not just bound by biological imperatives or existential circumstances, but by choices that reflect our deepest values and highest aspirations. And perhaps the most miraculous aspect of our persistence, in spite of the myriad divisions that separate us, be they cultural, religious, or political, we have, against considerable odds, managed to preserve the human project. In a universe where complexity and interconnectedness defy simple explanations, where the sum often transcends the individual components in inexplicable ways, we find ourselves compelled to look beyond the linear logic and isolated phenomena. This drive encourages us to think about the world not merely as a collection of separate entities acting upon each other in straightforward ways, but as an intricately woven tapestry, where each thread contributes to a greater elusive pattern. What if the way we come into being, the way we interact and evolve, isn't just a matter of straightforward causality? What if our lives, our world, and perhaps even the universe at large, are part of a more mysterious, nonlinear process that challenges our conventional understanding of time, space, and identity? As we dive into these next principles, perhaps we will shed some light on these very questions, illuminating the hidden mechanics by which diverse elements come together to create something wholly new, something that could not have been predicted by examining these elements in isolation. Prepare to venture beyond the superficial layer of existence, to probe the profound interdependencies that shape our world, and perhaps even guide the unfolding of the cosmos itself. This is a journey that promises to reshape not only how we view the universe, but also how we understand our place within it. The principles of coherence and co-emergence. Today, on the Infinite Harmony podcast.
Makes you wonder what the world's coming to.
Today we begin with the second principle, which reads, quote, "The Church of Infinite Harmony recognizes the universe as one coherent body, that all forms and atomic structures, seen and unseen, have the sovereign right of existence in the universe. These forms are not separate from each other, nor hold any hierarchy over each other, but are merely in varying states of vibration, rhythm, and polarity. Harmony is the willful acceptance of this without the desire to defeat, destroy, or silence or war with any other existing principle, person, or entity in the universe. The harmonic principle of coherence manifest is Gaia, the self-organizing being also known as planet Earth." So, basically, we're all one, and everything belongs here and is just as important as we are. Great. Now, if you look up the meaning of coherence online, you'll get a vast assortment of definitions depending on the discipline, be it physics, mathematics, or computer programming. For our purposes, we return to the Latin roots of the word cohere, which roughly means to stick together. Another way to say it is in the wise words of Terry Gilliam's great hero, Harry Tuttle. Listen, kid, we're all in it together. We're talking about the principles of togetherness, or the idea that as a species, and apparently as a planet, we can't just all do our own thing and look out for ourselves and everything will be all right. I mean, where would we be if no one was willing to make my morning mocha at the local cafe? Or pick up the garbage on Tuesdays? It's not hard to imagine the ways that we work together and are coherent in our everyday lives. This global interdependency isn't merely an abstract concept. It's a tangible reality we experience daily. Take, for example, the extensive international supply chains that bring goods to our doorstep. These don't just represent an economic interlocking of companies across borders. They underscore our collective reliance on one another to maintain not just our standard of living, but our very ability to live. But let's not limit our perspective to economic transactions or the flow of goods and services. What we're truly discussing here goes far beyond that. We're diving into the very fabric of existence, into the interconnectedness of all life forms, and even the elemental components of the earth itself. We're talking about indispensable resources like clean water and the role of trees in generating oxygen we breathe. We're acknowledging the crucial part played by pollinators, such as bees, in ensuring that our vegetable patches and fruit orchards are productive. This interconnectedness extends to the atomic level as well. Consider the symbiotic relationship between oxygen and hydrogen atoms. When they come together, they create water through a phenomenon known as co-emergence, a topic we will explore in greater depth later in this discussion. Co-emergence captures the essence of how seemingly disparate elements can combine to create something wholly new and essential. It's a principle that applies not only to molecular combinations, but to ecosystems, societies, and perhaps even to the intangible realms of culture and ideas. The harmonic principle of coherence manifest is Gaia. In essence, what we're circling around is not just a description of how things are, but a broader philosophical assertion about the nature of life and reality itself. We're observing that nothing exists in isolation, that everything is part of a greater whole, and that understanding this complex web of interdependencies is not just intellectually enriching, but also essential for our continued existence. So when we talk about international cooperation or the simple biological need for clean air and water, we're really engaging in a much larger conversation, a dialogue about the intricate and awe-inspiring interconnectedness that defines our world at every level. One of the themes we will explore in this podcast is a belief of the Church that intelligence and awareness are not just a phenomenon of human beings, but of all aspects of the universe, from atoms to planets. So when we look at the first sentence of the principle and we say, quote, All forms and atomic structures have the sovereign right to existence, end quote. We're talking about the first principles approach to existence. All things have a right to exist and have a place in existence, be they biological or epistemological, be they bird or rock or molecule. And in that right to exist also exists the necessity for all things to stick together or to get along. Even ideas have the right to exist.
Say what?
The next sentence says, quote, "These forms are not separate from each other, nor hold any hierarchy over each other, but are merely in varying states of vibration, rhythm, and polarity." We will dive deeper into vibration, rhythm, and polarity in future discussions, but in short, these are the principles of Hermetic magic. One of the Hermetic texts, the Kybalion, is one of the most influential occult texts of the 20th century. Each principle references the states and actions of matter and thought in the universe without distinguishing alive from dead, mind from body, etc. All that exists is subject to varying degrees of movement or vibration, opposing aspects of polarities, and the inflow or outflow of rhythm. We know from science that nothing in the universe is static, that all particles are moving or vibrating. We see all around us opposites or opposing states of varying degrees. Hot and cold, dark and light, man and woman, Democrats and Republicans. We see that even ideas tend to form opposites. We see that we have rhythms that are fundamental and instinctive. We sleep and we wake. The sun rises and sets every day. Well, unless you're at the North Pole. But even there is a rhythm of summer and winter. Nations rise and fall. Ice ages come and go. In these principles, we see that all things are constantly moving and changing, and yet somehow working together coherently to make reality. In these movements, there is no true separation of hierarchy. Humans may act like a dominant species or consider themselves superior to other life forms here on Earth. But without the trees, we do not breathe and have no refuge from the sun. Without water, we die. Simple. There's nothing fundamental even about oxygen, as at one point in the history of Earth, most life existed in a primarily carbon dioxide atmosphere. Without the rhythmic working of all aspects of our ecosystem, we're dust. Even within the realm of human civilization, we are certainly dependent on each other. Take away the advancements in technology, and we're basically back to being hunters and gatherers. I mean, imagine if you had to make something as simple and fundamental as a refrigerator for yourself from scratch. No hardware store, no Amazon.com. Where would you even start? Making the plastic or welding the metal alone is a task, never mind building a compressor or capturing Freon. I mean, what is that stuff anyway? But let's say all technology disappeared and we were back to square one. Surely then we could become self-reliant. The answer, of course, is no. Humans have operated in groups and tribes from the beginning because, among many things, it ensured survival. Spend a week in the Amazon or remote wilderness of Canada and you'll know why. Our collective intelligence is our evolutionary weapon. And yet, even that will not do much for us in the face of an angry grizzly bear or hungry jaguar. Pre-agricultural humans were remarkably dependent on each other, and that dependence demanded a certain level of cooperation and respect for the natural world. For it was the natural world that provided, directly. No grocery stores, no butchers. To eat was to engage with nature, to depend on it. This brings us to the idea of animism. One of the primary golden threads of this podcast. Animism, from the Latin word anima, which means breath or spirit or life. Animism is a belief that all things contain spirit, that there is no distinction between spiritual and physical. But more specifically and important, there is no distinction between humans and the natural world. There is no nature, only our ability to distinguish nature. Now, humans do seem to be quite unique. In this particular way, no other living creatures have presented themselves to be, which is our ability for abstraction. We can take something like walk and abstract the idea of movement. We can go even further and abstract the idea of fast and slow, and then build wheels to move us faster and improve upon walking. We use our capacity for abstraction to increase our capacity for action and evolve aspects of our survival. Language itself is an abstraction of just about everything in the universe. Because of this rather nifty ability, we've managed to abstract nature and human and draw a distinction. Now, whether this particular distinction is the root cause of our seemingly errant relationship with what we call nature can be and has been debated, but the principle of coherence teaches us that there is no distinction. We are the natural world, and the natural world is us. I could spend another episode giving examples of just how much our actions and ideas are really just reactions to the existing phenomenon, of how much our freedom and choice is mostly influenced by the world around us. The postmodernists and scientists have debated this in great detail. But rather, I would simply point out that despite our penchant as a society for freedom and individuality and sovereignty, we are deeply dependent on everyone and everything around us for that very freedom and individuality we experience. And yet, as we'll discuss later, our perception of sovereignty has deep purpose in this expression of life that has emerged as human. So let's take this a step further. We've established that this principle is asking us to accept that we are nature, there is no distinction, and existence is dependent on our relationship with everything else. So how does that change our perspective or behavior? Well, the next sentence of the principle, quote, "Harmony is the willful acceptance of the interconnectedness of all forms, without the desire to destroy, defeat, silence, or war with any other existing principle, person, or entity in the universe." This sentence helps us to understand why the Church is called the Church of Infinite Harmony. What is harmony to the Church? It is the willful acceptance of the interconnectedness of all forms without the desire to destroy, defeat, silence, or war with any other existing principle, person, or entity in the universe.
Yeah, you know I got that flavor.
In other words, everything is important and has the right to exist. Now notice that the first Judeo-Christian commandment doesn't make an appearance here. What we're talking about is the human propensity to fight, to win, to war. Death, and conversely killing, are integral aspects of life, at least here on Earth. Humans and animals and even plants kill other living things to sustain themselves. And even those of us that die without being consumed by another animal are consumed by the bugs and microbes of the soil eventually. We return to the atomic state of energy in one form or another, to be consumed as fuel to propel life into continuity. So, thou shalt kill to sustain and protect, just as the wolf and bear does so. Also, in no way do we value the life of one entity over another. Plants die to feed animals. Animals die to feed humans. Humans used to die to feed animals, but those days are mostly over. What we're talking about is the human propensity to distinguish right from wrong, good from bad, to pit one idea or one way of being against another. The absence of this, or its antithesis, acceptance, compassion, creation, these are the foundations of harmony. If you didn't listen to the first podcast, now would be a good time to go back. We discussed this in great detail, and as it's one of our great golden threads, we'll continue to do so throughout future podcasts. Now, there are a great many golden threads I can introduce here, such as Forrest Landry's effective choice, or James Carse's idea of evil. And further down the rabbit hole, we will. But instead, I'll leave you with a primer. It should be evident at this point that one of the purposes of the Church is to help humans uncover a path to peace and harmony with all living things, not just each other. In other words, to cohere. This brings us to the last sentence of the principle, which is, quote, "The harmonic principle of coherence manifest is Gaia, the self-organizing being also known as planet Earth," end quote. It is here that the principle declares the belief in Gaia as a sentient being, capable of responding to her own input and environmental factors, and has some sense of self-preservation. Now, as you're probably getting used to hearing me say, the Gaian theory, which was proposed by James Lovelock and Lynn Margulis in the 1970s, will definitely have its own episode. But for now, imagine that the Earth is a self-regulating system, not just the sum of all its parts, or a rocky home for the biological phenomenon of life, but a living system herself. Lovelock would be careful with this presentation of a conscious Gaia when presenting these hypotheses to the scientific community. But for now, assume this is a belief of the Church. Also, we're using the she pronoun here in accordance with the name Gaia, who is actually a Greek goddess of Earth personified, in case you're wondering. Now, this is also the animists' view, drawing no distinction between themselves and the Earth, nor any of the objects or beings on Earth. So if the Earth is alive, all its inhabitants and all that stems from it, even the abstract thoughts of humans, have intrinsic value and should be honored. So the question is, how do we live in greater coherence with all that is? This leads us to the next principle, which is the Principle of Co-Emergence. The third principle states, quote, "The Church of Infinite Harmony recognizes the living body of the universe as a self-organizing entity capable of transmuting itself within the self-realized container that is existence. The self-organizing properties of the universe are immanent, nonlinear, and are a co-emergence of each individual organism. Humans are an emergent property of a self-organized Gaia, or Earth, which is itself an emergent property of a self-organized universe, expanding toward deeper complexity, potentiality, and consciousness." End quote. You know, my hope is that one day science finds a home for these broader conceptual frameworks that we are developing. Certain frameworks mentioned, such as the emergent properties of complex systems, especially biological, or the nonlinearity of complex systems where changes can lead to disproportionately large effects, which make the whole more challenging to predict than studying its parts in isolation, are already studied in the realm of science. Animism, panpsychism, these are buckets one might throw the church doctrine in. But what's important to the future of humankind and the Earth is the willful acceptance of all parts of our evolution. James Lovelock's science behind Gaia was met with a lot of criticism. Some he admits was warranted and helped him to be a better scientist. But most was pure skepticism, void of any curiosity at the questions posed, because they didn't fit into the standard mold of reductive science. Some, however, were also interested in stepping beyond the veil of reductive thought and the Cartesian divide that fueled the Western mind. As author Stephen Herod Buhner says in his book, Plant Intelligence and the Imaginal Realm, quote, "The personification of Gaia points our awareness in a particular direction, to a place where the reductive mind cannot, does not want to reach. It holds within it the truth that there's nothing here that can be legitimately depersonified. Nothing can accurately be turned into a thing. The Gaia theory undermines the entire foundations of Western science, including the emotive distancing that is inherent in all fields of science. If one could distill the essence of a vast intellectual tapestry into a single thread of thought, then this, what we are about to explore, would be that golden thread. Our cultural, scientific, and philosophical traditions have deep roots, tracing back to figures like Aristotle and Descartes, whose ideas have a lasting influence on the shape and contour of Western thought, of the Western mind as a whole. And while their contributions are indubitably monumental, they also point us towards some troublesome crossroads, where our perspectives begin to diverge from a holistic understanding of the world. Take Aristotle's Scala Naturae, forgive my Latin, the great chain of being, which positioned humans just a notch below the divine, towering over a hierarchy of lesser beings and inanimate matter. Or consider Descartes' seminal dualism, which cleaved reality into the realms of mind and matter, setting the stage for a mechanistic worldview that saw the Earth and its myriad constituents as objects to be dissected and manipulated, rather than as parts of a larger living whole. You don't have to think too hard to think about how we think about things, a dissection of things into its parts. Now, we all know that if you dissect a human into parts and put it back together, you no longer have a human. So when we dissect various ideas and concepts and things into its parts, what are we missing in the whole? What happens when we impose such hierarchies and dualities onto the world that is, perhaps, more interconnected and interdependent than all these frameworks allow? When we make such a sharp distinction between us and the world, between the sentient and the supposedly inert, we set the stage for an anthropocentric narrative that has shaped centuries of human thought and action. And if we're willing to entertain the possibility that the earth itself, along with its winds, rocks, and oceans, might possess a kind of being, a form of consciousness or aliveness, then we're suddenly confronted with questions that shake the very foundations of our conventional wisdom. To understand co-emergence, let's talk about the coherence of ideas. Because what is being asked in this discussion is to re-examine the bedrock assumptions upon which much of our worldview is built. As we close out 2023, it has never been more apparent as to how many ideologically disparate ways of thinking are out there, especially in politics. We are deeply in need of some coherence here. Our information networks as a whole are mostly driven by ulterior motives that drive our belief system. But let's face it, we have designed that system that has incentivized conflict and rivalry, that monetizes attention, that monetizes our emotions. There's no doubt that we are being socially duped by our own technology and perverse incentives. But fundamentally, it is because we, as a society, have embraced rivalry despite our subconscious tendency towards cooperation. Ponder, if you will, the intricate nature of perspective, beginning with the very physiological process of human vision. True depth perception, a cornerstone of our interaction with the physical world, demands the collaborative work of two eyes. Each eye captures a slightly divergent view of an object, and it's the brain's task to reconcile these twin perspectives into a unified visual field, a process known as convergence. Without this neurological collaboration, our sense of depth, and by extension, our understanding of the world, would be profoundly limited. Extend this notion to the classic example of a cylinder. When viewed from the side, it manifests as a rectangle, while a head-on perspective reveals it as a circle. Each viewpoint, taken in isolation, would render a partial, even misleading representation of the cylinder's true form. Only by synthesizing multiple perspectives can we comprehend the cylinder's complexity, its fullness of being. If we were to rely on just one vantage point, we'd find ourselves in futile debate about the nature of shapes, arguing perhaps contentiously about circles and rectangles, when the truth encompasses both and transcends them. The lesson here is not merely optical. It serves as a metaphorical illustration for the human condition in the realm of ideas. Just as our depth perception depends on the convergence of dual perspectives, our collective understanding of any given subject is enriched when we integrate multiple viewpoints. Whether it's social discourse, scientific inquiry, or ethical deliberation, the principle remains the same. A singular perspective is rarely sufficient for grasping the multi-dimensional nature of reality. I propose for now that there is almost always a middle ground for reasoning between two ideas, between two perspectives, a middle ground we best get familiar with if we wish to cohere as a species. Once humans have established a coherence among themselves and with Gaia, the evolutionary power of co-emergence will propel us beyond many of the existential threats we face. Ask yourself the hard questions. What is the middle ground between our politics? Between abortion and pro-life? between economy and environmentalism, between individuality and community, between personal choices and collective responsibilities, between having whatever we want and minding our resources, between a gendered world and a non-gendered world, between the freedom of owning a gun and the safety of our citizens, between government and a truly free society. Back to the third principle, the principle of co-emergence. The first sentence reads, quote, "The Church of Infinite Harmony recognizes the living body of the universe as a self-organizing entity capable of transmuting itself within the self-realized container that is existence." End quote. Not only are we saying that Earth itself is alive, a self-organizing entity, but the whole universe and existence is just a self-realized container for this entity. Now, to elaborate this principle, I'm going to turn to a little-known talk given in 2016 by a then-young up-and-coming polymath, Daniel Schmattenberger, about the phenomenon of emergence at a festival of the same name. A link to the full talk will be given in the show notes, and I highly recommend giving it a listen.
This dude's kind of like an intellectual gangster.
And now for a little anecdote. I met Schmattenberger in 2015. I was a good friend of his neighbor at the time, and he had become fascinated with Schmattenberger and had suggested that I meet him and that we hang out. Now, I didn't think much of it, but went along and one day found myself sitting across from him in his living room, searching for a way to get out of the awkward stranger phase, and asked him, what do you do? What happened next felt a little like a psychedelic journey through parts of my brain I didn't even know existed. That's to say that the level of conversation, really one-sided to say the least, was an order of magnitude greater than anything I'd experienced. I left dazed and confused, and pretty sure at one point he said that he had some solid systems for addressing world hunger, but that the UN officials he was working with just didn't quite get it. So yeah, that's Schmattenberger.
Told you, gangster.
Now, that was 8 years ago, and I feel a little more equipped to shoot the proverbial stuff. So maybe we'll set up a conversation for the podcast somewhere down the road. Emergence, from the Latin to bring into the light, is the process of coming into being. In his talk, Schmattenberger is immediately going to bring into play the idea of synergy as the second side of the phenomena of emergence. Synergy, from the Latin to work together, has come now to be defined scientifically as two or more agents coming together to create something greater than the sum of their separate agency. Schmattenberger says that, quote, "Synergy is the property of a relationship where the whole has new properties that the parts didn't have. Emergence is a result of synergy. Synergy is a result of relationship. Relationship is a result of attractive forces," end quote. It's here that he illustrates this mysterious yet fundamental idea of attractive force. Think about the world around you from both the physical and metaphysical perspective, and how much of what we do and how we are governed is by some form of attractive force. Of course, we have gravity, which binds us to the Earth and planets, to suns and solar systems, to galaxies. But think about all the atoms in your body mysteriously bound by these attractive forces to make up the elements that we can see and feel and breathe. But now think as well of our attraction to other humans, or groups, or people, or ideas, and how those attractions lead to relationships that are beneficial to us, that evolve us. Schmattenberger would say that this attraction phenomenon lies at the heart of evolution, as evolution itself is a product of synergy, in which the evolved agent is the emergent property. Let's take you, for example, an emergent property of billions of years of evolution on the planet, which has produced a self-reflecting living being capable of abstract thinking, loving and hating, and, let's not forget, bad fart jokes. Reductionism may break us down into our parts to understand what we are made of, but the emergent property that is us literally cannot be broken down. If you were to disassemble us into all of our components at any level, say, take our brain and put it over here and our heart and put it over there, when you put us back together, well, we wouldn't be us anymore, would we? So, okay, great. We're emergent properties of the universe. So what? How does that lead the universe itself to being self-organizing? Let's continue to look at the implications of Schmattenberger's talk on emergence. His point is that emergence and evolution are two sides of the same coin, driven by synergy, and this idea of evolution is beyond biological selection, but is happening all around us at all times through relationship.
Pay attention.
I'm going to say that one more time. Emergence and evolution are two sides of the same coin driven by synergy, and this idea of evolution is beyond biological selection, but is happening all around us at all times through relationship. Schmattenberger says, quote, "We are very interested in having deep synergistic relationships with differences that lead to fundamentally different properties. Things can come together all kinds of different ways, but the things that come together most synergistically offer and confer the most advantage, so universe selects for it," end quote. He goes on to say that through this process, the arrow of evolution selects for, quote, "more differences and more synergistic combinations across those differences, more agency and more symbiosis," end quote. So let's speak of agency, for it is the agent that we are and the agents that propel the universe into infinite creativity. The agents are autonomous in the sense that they have their own boundaries and covenants, their own work, whether the work of a neuron or the work of a white blood cell or a sparrow. And since the beginning of the universe, there has been this self-organized dance towards greater and greater complexity, a more elegantly ordered complexity moving from space dust to birth of the self-reflective consciousness structures and the idea of consciousness itself. Schmattenberger takes us through the evolution of consciousness
By the evolution of a reptilian
system to a mammalian, to a system of neocortical and then prefrontal nervous systems, from pain, pleasure, to emotional cognition, to abstraction, end quote. Now we see the universe selecting and moving towards a greater depth of consciousness itself, which brings us to the last line of the principle. Quote, "Humans are an emergent property of a self-organized Gaia, or Earth, which itself is an emergent property of a self-organized universe, expanding towards deeper complexity, potentiality, and consciousness," end quote. Humans are but agents of Gaia, which itself is an agent of the universe as a whole. And all these things are emerging, in a sense, at once, a co-emergence, if you will. Now, it's on this matter of agency, of purpose, and of pontification that I let Schmattenberger guide us into a possibility of how this whole puzzle dials in just right. A little more around the whys and the what-fors. More importantly, what does an expansion towards deeper complexity, potentiality, and consciousness look like? And why, as autonomous agents that we are, is it in our blood, bone, and sinew that we strive towards self-actualization? Here we are in 2023 with cell phones and TikTok and ozone depletion and fracking, and one might think, what the hell is the use of this prefrontal cortex anyway? Seems to be doing nothing but upending all the good linear evolutionary vibes Mother Earth had going for a few billion years.
Maybe she effed up.
Well, if we're talking synergy, then there is no effing up. We have been selected for. But why? One word Schmattenberger would say is abstraction. That word that we highly criticized earlier in the episode. Our ability to abstract makes us co-conspirators of creation. It does have a function. He says, quote, "We have the capability of looking at what the whole story is and identifying as the whole evolutionary pulse for the universe that brought about me and then woke up to itself in me. In a meaningful way, I am the evolutionary impulse of the universe awoke to itself in the form that can contemplate and choose how to consciously participate in each creation. To not just be aboard spaceship Earth, but crew," end quote. We are evolution waking up to itself. We are the universe waking up to its own creation. Each one of us. Schmattenberger explains how through this process we can move away from pain and external pressure as the primary evolutionary drivers toward a drive to create, to bring forth in the universe what did not exist before. That as a willing participant, driven not by what he calls algorithmic drivers of evolution prior to self-reflective consciousness, but by the awakened agency of universe itself and thus Gaia itself, our purpose unfolds from the twin diamond of coherence and co-emergence. All that exists, from space dust to human beings, has agency and must work together to continue to unfold the infinite color palette of existence across the spiraling arrow of time. We are an emergent property of universe, dependent on everything that came before us. From the perspective of these two principles, any idea that our existence is fundamentally more important or greater than another is senseless. It is like preferring air over water. You will live a little longer with just air than with just water, but in the end, the result is the same. You cannot live without them both. We see humans competing for resources and real estate and notoriety, all while our biosphere continuously degrades because ultimately, we've been conditioned to value ourselves over not just other humans, but the Earth itself. If we are not just aboard spaceship Earth, but crew, it appears each member of the crew has decided that they can rip apart the ship, piece by piece, and build their own spaceship. Except there's only one of everything that's needed.
Couldn't you use your powers to achieve that, instead of continuing this endless cycle of destruction?
Schmattenberger gives many talks about the existential crisis that we face as humans and the severity of problems that stand before us now. And keeping ourselves alive ultimately begins with getting better at making a more effective choice. A choice that is best for everyone and everything on the planet. Our existence is made up of the choices we have made as agents, with our reality being an emergent property of our synergies, or sometimes entropies. We are obliged to realize all that we have to offer, and we are obliged to hear the voice of every being as well as pave their path towards self-actualization. That is coherence. So this brings up a great many questions about how we can honor all the emergent properties that is life on Earth and bring them into coherence, into harmony. Ask yourself, how do we limit rivalry between individuals and create group coherence? How do we limit rivalry between groups and create cultural coherence? How do we limit rivalry between cultures and create global coherence? How do we become like a body, with all parts operating in unity in pursuit of life itself? How do we seek to understand deeply points of view that we oppose and integrate them into greater coherence? How do we keep knowledge in the mythic, in the experiential, so it does not become a dogma or ideology that inevitably creates opposition? I'll leave you with one last quote from Schmattenberger's talk, an idea that no doubt helped him form the title of his website, Civilization Emerging, which I'll put in the episode notes. He says, "Remember that the universe moves towards more differentiation, more novelty, and then more symbiosis across that novelty for more emergence. What we're moving towards is a civilization where everyone identifies this way, as an emergent property of the whole, as a connected part of the universe with a unique role to play, with unique synergies with all other roles. And with that synergy and human participation, humanity becomes a thing. It becomes an emergent property." Thanks for listening, friends, and I hope you enjoyed this episode. If you would like to support this podcast, visit the Church of Infinite Harmony website, infiniteharmony.org, and consider becoming a monthly contributor. As you can probably tell, this podcast launched with episodes 1 and 2 in the bank. As I finish recording this episode, we're coming up on Thanksgiving. My guess is that we're not going to see episode 3 till early January, but hang on tight. After that, we're going to do our best. I am going to do my best to get these episodes out once a month. So until then,
To infinity and beyond.